Good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West, to the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is July the 17th, the 198th day of the year. 167 days remaining to the year's over with. Holidays, observances. National Tattoo Day. Run out and get one. World Emoji Day. National Lottery Day. It pays you money, it takes your chance, you might have a potential windfall. National Yellow Pig Day. Adding the first four prime numbers together equals the fifth. 17. Create your own origami or paper mache yellow pig based on the studies of two students obsessed with the number 17. How about National Peach Ice Cream Day? World Day for International Justice. National Wrong Way Corrigan Day. Now you've heard of the Wright brothers, but imagine setting off on a journey only to arrive at a completely different airport than you expected to. His name was Douglas Wrong Way Corrigan. He was a pilot in 1938, claimed to have accidentally flown from New York to Ireland instead of his intended destination of California. This day highlights the boldness and the determination to drive individuals to pursue their dreams, even when faced with obstacles. Corrigan's unplanned transatlantic flight captured the public's imagination, actually made him a folk hero. Quite frankly, he couldn't have been more off than he was flying in the wrong direction. It's also the day for International Criminal Justice. The Drina Regatta goes on to the 20th. Galway International Arts Festival goes on to the 27th. In Ireland, Tour de France goes on to the 27th. Famous people born on this date: Billy Lord. Now, let's see what else we got in the news. The Democrats have stormed out of a vote on a controversial Trump nominee. They left the room before the panel voted to confirm the judicial nomination of Trump's former personal attorney, Emil Bovee. They did it before the panel voted to advance his nomination to the full Senate floor for a vote. Senator Cory Booker, big mouth Democrat from New Jersey, urged Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, for the vote to allow him to consider the allegations against Bovee made by a former Justice Department attorney, Erez Ruvini, in a whistleblower report. Booker invoked Rule 4 of the committee rules, trying to push for additional debate time. Grassley declined to acknowledge it before ordering the vote. What prompted the Democratic members to get up and leave the room? Well, according to Booker, debating the nomination puts things on the record. And that's what they were there for. Now, Democrats, the very same things that they did when they were in power, they're screaming about today. Well, Karine Jean-Pierre and more top Biden aides are going to appear in the House cover-up probe. She's expected to sit down with the House Oversight Committee and talk about whether or not she saw any mental decline in former President Biden. Certainly, there has been a lot of strange behavior. We've had two folks who appeared under subpoena invoked the fifth rather than answer any questions at all. And that would seem to raise a lot of questions in and of itself. She's going to sit down with the House Oversight Committee in September. House Oversight Committee aide told Fox News she's one of 4 high-profile former Biden officials who've scheduled interviews with the panel. Also expected to appear in the coming weeks are Ian Sams, former Special Assistant to the President, a senior advisor in the White House Counsel's Office, Alan Bates, former Deputy Assistant to the President, a senior Deputy Press Secretary, and Jeff Zients, former White House Chief of Staff, according to that aide. Well, according to Committee Chair James Comer, Republican of Kentucky, they're investigating allegations Biden's former top White House aides covered up signs of his mental and physical decline while he was in office, and whether any executive actions were commissioned through AutoPen without his doing anything about them. Now, Biden's assured the New York Times he made every single decision on his own, even those he doesn't remember. Well, Mamdani is torched after a video surfaced about where he gets his money. He sparked social media frenzy with vile clips discussing what happens if he runs out of money. He's facing heat online over a clip where he explains how he's able to take time off from work because he knew his parents would financially support him. He said, I worked till January and I took time away from my job, and one of the main reasons I could do that was because I knew if I ran out of my savings, my family would support me. Now, that clip got criticism on social media from those pointing to Mamdani's socialist policies, suggested the clip's evidence he's comfortable spending money that belongs to taxpayers due to his wealthy upbringing. Well, former Georgia police officer died after saving 5 in a beach rip current. Chase Childers, 38, survived by a wife and 3 children. He's a decorated former police officer, an ex-Baltimore Orioles minor league player. He was trying to rescue swimmers from a rip current off the coast of South Carolina. Being called a hero after he drowned while trying to help those swimmers in distress near Pawleys Island in South Carolina on July 13th. He wasn't the only one to go after those swimmers, but unlike the others, he didn't return to shore. Emergency responders recovered his body about 90 minutes after the initial distress call was made. Democrats have hit rock bottom as the party plummets to all-time low, according to polls. Republicans enjoy a 77% approval rating from their base as Trump's agenda advances despite opposition. Just 19% of voters questioned in the national poll gave Democrats in Congress a thumbs up on how they're handling their duties. 72% disapproved. That's an all-time low since Quinnipiac University first began asking congressional approval questions in their surveys 16 years ago. Reporter says he got PTSD from Trump's assassination attempt because of the crowd's response. That's a CBS News reporter. Says he feared for his life as a rally attendees blamed the press file after the shooting. CBS News reporter Scott McFarlane told podcaster Chuck Todd he's traumatized by the anger the press faced from Trump rally goers who blamed the media for the Butler, Pennsylvania assassination attempt. Even though America in general reeled in shock from the attempt on his life, McFarlane said he had personal trauma from the crowd's immediate rage and response. Well, Adam Schiff's being called a scam artist. as a result of the mortgage fraud allegations that stretch back years. Fannie Mae investigation found a sustained pattern of alleged misrepresentations. Longtime President Donald Trump political foe, California Democrat Senator Adam Schiff, referred to the Department of Justice to face criminal prosecution over alleged mortgage fraud. He was elected to the Senate in a 2024 election cycle. After decades in the House, he's under scrutiny after the U.S. Federal Housing Finance Agency sent a letter to the Department of Justice in May sounding an alarm in multiple instances. He allegedly falsified bank documents and property records to acquire more favorable loan terms, impacting payments from 2003 to 2019 for a Potomac, Maryland-based property. Well, this week, Trump publicly lambasted Schiff over the alleged mortgage fraud, while Fannie Mae's financial crimes investigation included Monday in a letter to the FHFA that Schiff allegedly engaged in a sustained pattern of occupancy misrepresentation on 5 Fannie Mae loans. And this is a man who said nobody's above the law. Well, prosecutors have abandoned the fight for silence in the Kohlberg case after his guilty plea. Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide but likely had help, according to his former lawyer, Alan Dershowitz. He suggested jail personnel may have helped Epstein commit suicide. In a Wall Street Journal op-ed, Dershowitz wrote, "It's clear from the evidence that Epstein committed suicide. What isn't clear is whether he was assisted by jail personnel. Seems likely to Dershowitz, based on the evidence of allegedly broken cameras and the transfer of his cellmate and the absence of guards during the relevant time period, that something hinky was underway." Well, sports pundit Sarah Spain has slammed Shane Gillis over what she calls hacky jokes about female athletes. Sarah Spain is a sports media personality. She took issue with Gillis's cracking jokes about female athletes during the ESPY Awards on Wednesday night. His jokes included a crack about Caitlin Clark working at a Waffle House when she retires from the NBA to continue with fist-fighting black women, needling former U.S. women's soccer star Megan Rapinoe, and tricking the crowd into believing his friend's wife was a former WNBA player. Russia threatens the West with preemptive strikes as NATO looks to deliver Patriot missiles as quickly as possible. Medvedev has called NATO's actions a full-scale war, while Trump redirects the Patriot missiles and threats a 100% tariff on Russian oil buyers. Medvedev, who is the former Russian president, said Moscow ought to consider launching preemptive strikes against the West as U.S. and its NATO allies ratchet up defensive support for Ukraine. He's deputy chair of the Russia's Security Council. He said in an interview with TASS that the statements of the Western politicians on this topic are complete nonsense. We need to act accordingly. Respond in full, if necessary, and launch preemptive strikes. His comments came just 2 days after President Trump announced secondary tariffs on Moscow by slapping 100% tariffs on nations that purchased Russian oil if the Kremlin didn't enter into a peace agreement with Ukraine within the next 50 days. Reports also surfaced this week claiming that Trump had considered the possibility of Ukraine hitting the Russian capital while in a call with the Ukrainian President Zelensky earlier this month. Kiev wouldn't comment on the issue, and the White House said the question was taken out of context and wasn't an attempt to encourage any further killing. Well, American Idol exec and her husband ratcheted up their security before the deadly mansion attack that killed both of them. American tourist has been confirmed dead after the Turks and Caicos vacation disappearance. Brian Terrence's belongings remained at the vacation condo while the wife was unaware of his disappearance through the next morning. The body was found in Turks and Caicos a week ago, has been identified as the missing American man who vanished while vacationing in this tropical paradise. Brian Terrence is 51 from Monroe, New York, went missing on June 25th during a vacation with his wife on the Turks and Caicos Island, according to the Royal Turks and Caicos Islands Police Force. He was seen leaving his condo about 3:30 in the morning at the Paradise Inn in Grace Bay. Provincialis, Turks and Caicos. In the press release, the island's police force confirmed his identity was confirmed after the conclusion for a forensic dental analysis. No signs of trauma were found. Police don't suspect foul play. But they could have him on video being shot and then say there was no foul play because they don't want to interfere with the tourist trade. Tim Walz has urged Democrats to shed their anti-business image and appeal to the entrepreneurs in the country. Grand juror has been charged with leaking confidential information in the Karen Reed murder case. Jessica Leslie released a plea deal with one-day sentence after sharing sealed testimony details. Not supposed to do that, you know. That's considered a big no-no. Johnny Manziel admits he thought about an NFL comeback attempt. He was talking to Logan Paul. He may go down as one of the biggest what-ifs in NFL history as the electric Heisman Trophy winning quarterback flamed out in the pros after the Cleveland Browns selected him in the first round in 2014. Played 2 seasons in the NFL before trying his hand at the Canadian Football League and the Alliance of American Football. Appeared on Logan Paul's Impulsive podcast and revealed he's almost attempted an NFL return. Well, I don't think he'll get too far. Connie Francis, the pretty little baby singer, just died at age 87. I thought she's already long dead. Known for hits like Everybody's Somebody's Fool, was hospitalized earlier this month for extreme pain. Ron Roberts, the president of Francis record label Concetta Records, shared that information on the artist's official Facebook page on Thursday. She said she was back in the hospital where she's been undergoing tests and checks to determine the cause of the extreme pain she's been having. And she wrote on Facebook, she's pleased to advise following a series of tests and examinations in intensive care, she's now back in a private room. 2 days later, she's feeling a whole lot better. Well, unfortunately, she slipped away during the night. She was unconscious for 2 days before she died. Well, the city government with the most corruption has been named. District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. Tops the corruption list while New Hampshire ranks the lowest according to the Cato Institute. With big government, you have big problems, and public corruption's highest in places with large bureaucracies. Well, the Senate panel has advanced Emil Bovey's nomination in spite of questions. Army secretaries vowed grievous error in targeting pro-life group. It's never going to happen again. Army removed the slides that reference pro-life groups, pro-animal, and green groups like PETA as terrorist organizations. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll called a set of training slides that deemed pro-life groups terrorist organizations was a grievous error. And he's going to work to ensure it doesn't happen again. The ACLU, which represents Operation Rescue, which is a pro-life group that was affected, apparently threatened to file suit, and Army tucked its tail and ran. Well, flight passengers are raising the issue about travelers who eat smelly foods on airplanes. ICE officials criticized the Chicago mayor over remarks on immigration enforcement policies. He's got a lot of room to talk. More people die on a weekend in Chicago than during any given week anyplace else in the country. Well, in St. Augustine, Florida, a video was caught that captured a woman struggling as a kidnapper tried to drag her into a truck. Chinese buyers are buying up U.S. homes as we have an affordability crisis. Maureen Comey, daughter of former FBI head James Comey, has been fired by the DOJ. The two Republican senators have joined the Democrats in a failed attempt to block Trump's $9 billion bill. Country star Darius Rucker unexpectedly ended his Atlantic City show mid-set. He issued a heartfelt apology and said there'd be a full refund for fans. He suddenly paused after performing a few songs at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Atlantic City and said he couldn't continue. He said, "I can't sing anymore." He was the front man for Hootie and the Blowfish. He said, "I'm going to play one more song and you're going to get your money back." Well, House Republicans have raised the idea of grilling Joe and Jill Biden as former aides have stonewalled the cover-up probe. Now, clearly, there are a lot of issues in the Biden administration. All right. I think that ends our news segment. You know, we've been talking about a lot of little-known government programs. But there's not just government programs that are kept quiet. There's deadly events that are kept under wraps, and not just here, but in other countries. We're going to go to Korea in 1920. It's known as the Gando Massacre. 3,000 civilians were executed. Witnesses were threatened into silence. This national disgrace was buried in diplomacy and denial. Now, the Gando Massacre is also known as the Gando Massacre. It took place in October 1920. After a major uprising of Korea's independence movement, after guerrilla Korean independence fighters defeated Japanese troops in the Battle of Pingwudong, the Japanese Imperial Army retaliated by launching a brutal crackdown across the Gando region. That's the modern-day Yanbian, eastern Manchuria near the North Korean border. And although the Japanese government justified the action as a counterinsurgency against armed resistance, what happened next was not a military operation, it was a massacre. In just a few weeks, Japanese forces slaughtered over 3,000 Korean civilians. Not only men, but women, children, and elderly. Villages were burned to the ground. Suspected collaborators were tortured, and witnesses, including foreign missionaries, later gave descriptions about organized executions, rape, and body disposals. Now, there are several contemporaneous sources, some of which remain hidden or untranslated for decades, that document these atrocities. There are missionary reports from American and Canadian Christians stationed in eastern Manchuria that describe the systematic nature of the killings. Reverend E.J. Baird, a Canadian missionary in Longjing, wrote that the Japanese pursued Koreans like animals. Men were hung from trees, entire families are burned alive. Chinese government reports filed during the Republic of China period, that's 1920 and 21, referred to Japanese actions in the region as barbarous, inhumanity, unbecoming of a military power. Korean Independence Archives, preserved in exile by the Provisional Government of Korea, based in Shanghai, detail victim counts, names of villages, and tactics used by Japanese forces, which included using civilians for bayonet practice and the burning of entire settlements. Diplomatic dispatches from U.S. and British consulates in Mukden and Harbin noted alarming brutality and mass executions, but were never publicized to avoid escalating tensions with Japan. But despite this very clear paper trail, the massacre vanished from most history books for almost 100 years. Now, much of the Gando Massacre's legacy survives in oral testimony passed down through families whose villages were destroyed. Kim Jong-sik, a Korean farmer who survived the attack as a child, told his family he watched his older brother executed and their home burned while his mother was forced to stand at gunpoint and watch. Villagers from Jangbak County spoke in later decades of Japanese soldiers forcing civilians into schoolhouses and set the schoolhouses on fire while gunmen stationed outside shot anybody that tried to escape. 1990, Korean descendants of survivors began recording stories in local historical centers, pushing for official recognition and preservation of the events. Now, you might ask yourself why the facts of this massacre was erased. And multiple forces combined to bury the truth about the Gando Massacre. There was colonial censorship. Korea was under full Japanese occupation from 1910 to 1945. Colonial government suppressed news, arrested journalists, and erased historical records that casted Japan in a brutal light. There was geopolitical avoidance. After World War II, during the Cold War, neither the U.S. nor China wanted to inflame regional tensions with Japan, who's now a strategic ally in the Pacific. Even South Korea, under U.S.-aligned military dictatorships for decades, avoided major diplomatic confrontations on historical war crimes. And there was academic silence. For much of the 20th century, the Gando Massacre was considered a taboo topic in mainstream Japanese scholarship. Global textbooks rarely mentioned Korea's independence struggle at all. And of course, there was victim displacement. The Gando survivors resettled across the Korean peninsula and China, often stayed silent out of trauma and shame and fear of retaliation. Now, in recent decades, South Korean historians and activists have worked to revive public memory of the massacre. In 2006, South Korea's Truth and Reconciliation Commission officially recognized the Gando Massacre as a documented war atrocity and began collecting survivor accounts and archival materials. Korean schools have slowly reintroduced the event in the national curriculum, although controversy remains over the political framing. In 2012, a memorial site was established in Yangon, Korean Autonomous Prefecture in China, acknowledging the historical trauma shared by ethnic Koreans still living in the region. And declassified Chinese records from the 20s and the 50s include evidence that the Gando crackdown was far more extensive than earlier estimates, possibly involving multiple coordinated units of the Japanese Kwantung Army, not just a rogue detachment or two. Now, some of the surviving documentation includes missionary letters from the Canadian Presbyterian Church archives, provisional Korean government documents held in Seoul's Independence Hall, classified diplomatic telegrams unearthed in Britain's Foreign Office records, handwritten testimony from survivors now preserved in the Northeast Asian History Foundation, and photographs of destroyed villages taken by Chinese citizens or Western missionaries. But equally telling are the items that didn't survive, such as Japanese military logs from the operation that were destroyed during surrender in 1945, local census data from the Gando region pre- and post-massacre is missing from both the Korean and the Japanese archives, and eyewitness footage remains unrecovered or even suppressed. Now, the Gando Massacre wasn't an isolated incident. It was one of the earliest large-scale atrocities committed under Japanese imperial expansion. That was a dark rehearsal for what would unfold across Nanking and Manila and beyond. It wasn't just a battle, it was a purge. But there's still one major question. Why did it take so long for the world to care about 3,000 murders? Well, from Gando, let's talk about the Nazi uranium cubes. Dozens of uranium cubes. It was a Nazi nuclear program cloaked in failure, but still, to this day, shrouded in secrets. After Nazi Germany's surrender in 1945, Allied forces uncovered a disturbing puzzle in the ruins of the Third Reich. Hundreds, and I mean hundreds, of small, dense black cubes of uranium. Many arranged in suspended chains within the underground bunkers and secret research facilities. And these cubes, each roughly the size of a fist, run like anything Allied scientists had ever seen before. Now, uranium hadn't been just weaponized. And its arrangement and purity suggested an advanced attempt at nuclear chain reaction experimentation. While the world remembers Hiroshima and Nagasaki as the birth of the atomic age, Nazi scientists have been quietly racing toward that same terrifying power for a long time. And they may well have been closer to success than history wants to admit. Now, each one of these mysterious cubes measured about 2 inches across and weighed nearly 5 pounds. They were refined uranium metal, extremely rare and difficult to process at the time. They were part of a Nazi nuclear research initiative under the Uranium, or Uranium Club. That was Germany's equivalent of the Manhattan Project. The Uranium Club was formed in 1939, included some of the most brilliant German physicists, including Werner Heisenberg, Otto Hahn, and Kurt Diebner. Cubes were suspended from wires inside heavy water tanks, likely as part of an early reactor prototype attempting to achieve nuclear fission chain reactions. Now, their goal wasn't just a bomb, but a sustainable nuclear reactor that could lead to plutonium production or generate enormous amounts of power for weapons research. Most famous site for a Nazi lab was hidden in a cave in Hudnall in southern Germany. In that cave, Diebner's team built a rudimentary reactor core consisting of 664 uranium cubes suspended in a lattice inside a tank of heavy water. Deuterium oxide. The design mirrored reactor concepts later used in American nuclear research. It just never quite achieved critical mass. Now, why was that the case? Likely because the Nazis lacked enough heavy water, a crucial moderator for sustaining the reaction. Much of the heavy water supply had been destroyed or sabotaged by Allied operations in Norway. Notably, the Norwegian heavy water sabotage missions that crippled the Nazi supply chain. But the Nazis didn't give up. By the end of the war, at least 3 competing reactor experiments were underway and more uranium cubes were being prepared, though a lot of them vanished before Allied troops arrived. Now, where did those vanished cubes go? After the war, the U.S. launched Operation Alsos, top-secret mission to recover Nazi atomic research. Uranium cubes from Hudnall and other labs were seized and transported to the U.S. for analysis. Eventually, most of them ended up at Los Alamos and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. But this is where things got strange, folks. Of the estimated 1,200 to 1,500 cubes believed to have been produced by the Nazis, only about 600 have ever been accounted for. Some were destroyed, some used in U.S. research, and some placed in archives and museums. But the others? Oh, they vanished without explanation. Now, rumors do persist that Soviet troops recovered uranium cubes in eastern Germany and relocated them to Russian nuclear facilities as part of Operation Osoverakim, the SSR's version of Operation Paperclip. Other accounts suggest German scientists may have sold or hidden material, either during the chaos or surrender in exchange for leniency. Now, in recent years, scientists and historians have begun to track those surviving cubes. As of 2020, researchers at Idaho National Laboratory confirmed several authentic Nazi uranium cubes using non-invasive radioisotope testing to trace their purity and origin. One cube surfaced in Maryland, another at the University of Maryland, and the third was discovered in a box at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, each with a handwritten Nazi tag or serial markings. Research continues to determine whether these cubes are all part of a single failed reactor or whether multiple independent projects are running across Germany. But despite the physical cubes, key documentation is still missing. The full engineering specifications for Deibner's and Heisenberg's reactor designs were never recovered. Diaries and letters from senior Nazi physicists abruptly end in early 1945. Declassified Allied files revealed many technical drawings and lab notes were lost in transit, raising suspicion that some data may have been intentionally buried or redirected into Cold War black ops. And what's more, the U.S. government sealed many uranium-related findings in the classification until early 2000s, and some files remain inaccessible even now. Well, the question has long been raised, could Nazi Germany have built the bomb? And most historians seem to agree that Nazi Germany lacked both the infrastructure and the scientific consensus needed to produce a bomb before the war's end. Heisenberg himself later admitted never pushed a reactor past basic research levels. But the fact remains they had the materials, they had the math, they had the motive, and had the war drug on, the outcome would have been terrifyingly different. The uranium cubes are more than just failed experiments, they're physical remnants of an unknown ambition. Every cube is a window into what might have been. World where nuclear power began in the hands of fascism. World where science covered the gaps in the records. World where not everything from 1945 was fully accounted for. And as long as some of these cubes remain missing, so do all the answers. But there is one story I came across that I found fascinating. A Russian division was almost literally annihilated by what could only have been an atomic bomb. That was in late 44, early 45. Could, in fact, there have been a German nuclear weapon dropped on a Russian division? Well, depending on who you talk to, you can't get confirmation. Well, from the potential of the German nuclear program, let's talk about forgotten tunnels underneath the city of Chicago. Now, far below the traffic-clogged streets of downtown Chicago is one of the strangest engineering feats in American history. A 60-mile network of underground tunnels built in total secrecy and largely erased from modern maps. Built starting in 1906 and operating until 1959, the Chicago Tunnel Company's freight system was once a bustling subterranean artery for the city's commerce. They moved mail and coal and merchandise and even ashes through the narrow-gauge electric trains that ran beneath the feet of Chicago citizens. When the system was finally shut down, it didn't just fall into disuse. Oh no, it vanished from public consciousness. Parts of the layout were intentionally kept from public records, particularly during the Cold War. And why might that be? Because these tunnels, quiet and fortified and mostly unknown, offer a ready-made evacuation and transport route for emergency government use, one that nobody was supposed to know about. Now, it was originally pitched as a telecommunications conduit project. Chicago Tunnel Company began boring beneath the city downtown in the early 1900s. Officially, they were laying conduits for phone and telegraph cables. But by 1906, there was no doubt it was a much larger operation taking place. A vast two-level tunnel network stretched beneath the Loop and Central Business District, connected to hundreds of buildings through elevator shafts and side branches. Among the key features were narrow-gauge electric rail lines, 2 feet wide. The ceiling heights were 6 to 7 feet. Temperature-stable routes were perfect for storing and moving heat-sensitive goods. And there were central hubs beneath post offices and department stores and banks and industrial buildings. For over 50 years, these tunnels have quietly powered logistics of Chicago's downtown. They've been used for hauling mail for the U.S. Postal Service, hauling coal to heat skyscrapers, taking ashes and trash away from furnaces, and bringing in retail stock for companies like Marshall Fields and Sears. At its peak, the system was moving 1,000 tons of freight daily, without anybody on the streets noticing a thing. Well, while the system was a complete secret during its operational years, much of the route was never disclosed on public infrastructure maps. Building blueprints often included vague utility access annotations. City records showed inconsistencies in depth and direction. And when the system was decommissioned in the late 50s due to the rise of surface trucking and air conditioning, the very discussion of the presence of this system quickly faded. During the Cold War, the tunnels took on a new role. Declassified municipal and federal documents suggest that sections of the tunnel network were evaluated and partially preserved for emergency use in case of nuclear attack. Chicago, like a lot of major U.S. cities, developed civil defense evacuation strategies in the 50s. Officials realized the already built tunnel system could serve as a rapid evacuation or relocation path for key personnel, function as a protective corridor between government buildings, especially if surface routes are blocked, and act as a communications cable shelter in case of bombings. Although never converted into a bunker system, certain access points were reinforced and maintenance of select sections were quietly continued even after freight operations ceased. The entire time, the public was never informed. Now, most of Chicago had forgotten all about the tunnels till April 13, 1992, when a bizarre accident turned hidden history into front-page news. Construction near the Chicago River breached one of the old tunnel walls. Water rushed in, flooded basements, electrical systems, and sub-basements throughout the loop, caused almost $2 billion in damages. For a lot of Chicagoans, it was the first time they learned that their skyscraper stood above a submerged, aging labyrinth. Photos of flooded passageways and rusted rail lines and abandoned switchboards stunned the public. Engineers had to scramble to locate sealed blueprints and forgotten schematics just to stop the flooding. And even then, a full map of the system wasn't made public. Much of the tunnel network remains sealed or collapsed. Some areas are filled in, others are off limits or even owned privately with security access under municipal contracts. But urban explorers and researchers have compiled accounts of welded steel doors beneath government buildings, unmarked stairwells and parking garages leading to bricked-over shafts. Ventilation shafts still pull air from unknown sources. And some people theorize that portions are still used as maintenance corridors or secure routing paths for sensitive communications, especially near the old financial centers. Still others believe that now sealed Cold War artifacts still intact and untouched since the 1960s. One like New York's famous subway or Washington's well-documented underground, Chicago's tunnel system was intentionally unglamorous. It was meant to function invisibly, like veins beneath the skin of the city. Even the workers that used it daily entered through back alleys and basement doors, often unaware of the full extent of the network. And because of this, the absence of major public signage or stations, the system became a ghost of industrial progress. One that only surfaces during floods and construction errors or strange urban legends. Now, if you want more evidence, check the Chicago Historical Society archives on the Tunnel Company. Look at U.S. Civil Defense records from 1956 to 1963 under the reference Chicago Subterranean Evacuation Routes. And look at the 1992 Chicago Flood Investigation Reports. They include blueprints of breached tunnel segments. There's also eyewitness testimony from municipal engineers and retired freight operators. And there's photos and video from urban explorers before the 2000s, before the system was completely locked down. Chicago tunnel system wasn't just an engineering marvel, it was a parallel city, hidden just feet below the one we know. carrying not only goods, but the forgotten momentum of a different kind of urban future. This silence wasn't just due to abandonment, it was due to design. But for those who look closely, well, some doors may still be down there. You never know what you're going to find. Well, from the tunnels beneath Chicago, let's talk about the light codes of Chaco Canyon. Now, this is deep in the high desert of northwest New Mexico. Chaco Canyon is once home to the ancestral Puebloans, also known as the Anasazi. 2850 and 1250 AD, these ancient engineers constructed massive stone complexes summarizing 4 stories high, aligned with precise geometrical and celestial logic. But among the most mysterious and overlooked features of Chaco are narrow shafts, wall openings, and corridors designed to capture light at exact moments. When the sun pierces through at solstices and equinoxes and lunar standstills, illuminating carvings and chambers with pinpoint accuracy. Now, in spite of rumors to the contrary, these are not accidental alignments. They were intentional sky codes, a blend of architecture, ritual, and cosmic precision that rival Stonehenge and pyramids in sophistication. And structures like Pueblo Bonito, Casa Rinconada, and Fajada Butte, researchers have documented alignments that are anything but random. The most famous is the sun dagger site at Fajada Butte. Spiral petroglyph is struck by a dagger-like beam of light in the summer solstice and bracketed by the twin beams on the winter solstice. The actual calendar carved into stone. Discovered by researcher Anna Saqqara in 1977, the sun dagger became the centerpiece of a long-ignored astronomical legacy. Other structures revealed windows and corridors where sunlight only enters on specific days of the year, and strike carvings and illuminate inner walls. Even the 18.6-year lunar standstill cycle, an astronomical event missed by many modern cultures, appears to be trapped within the canyon's geometry. For decades, mainstream archaeologists downplayed the light alignments. Critics claimed no coincidences, arguing the structures served no timekeeping purpose and the Puebloans lacked such astronomical understanding. But modern tools, such as 3D scans and solar simulation models and drone surveys and peer-reviewed studies, confirm the accuracy and intentionality of these alignments. Evidence forced a shift. Chaco Canyon is now recognized by many researchers as one of the most advanced prehistoric observatories in the world, capable of tracking solar and lunar and possibly planetary cycles with astounding precision. So what were these alignments used for? The dominant view is they help guide agricultural timing, ritual calendars, and communal gatherings. Solstices and equinoxes mark planting and harvest times. Shared celestial events reinforce cultural unity across vast distances. But some researchers, especially indigenous oral historians, claim there's a deeper meaning. Light wasn't just functional. It was spiritual, a symbolic force, a messenger, if you will. And in this particular view, Chaco Canyon wasn't just a city. It was a ceremonial machine built to synchronize human life with the rhythms of the cosmos. Now, the sun dagger site was a bit damaged by tourism in the 1980s, eventually closed to the public. Despite its significance, and preservation came slowly. Interpretive materials remained minimal. And some said the answers raised too many questions. Questions we couldn't answer. Others believe the implications of advanced indigenous science, and especially sky-based cosmology, challenged long-standing narratives in archaeology and public history. There's long been institutional discomfort with integrating spiritual and mystical or indigenous cosmologies into what's known as serious academic frameworks. Now, there's been some recent rediscoveries. New technologies help ignite interest. LiDAR and satellite imaging have uncovered more long-range alignments and roads that connect Chaco to outlying sites like the Aztec ruins and San Pueblo. Drone surveys and solar modeling confirm intentional positioning with celestial bodies. Oral traditions from the Hopi and the Zuni and the Pueblo elders describe sacred relationships with the sky, mirroring what the architecture suggests. And together, these findings paint a picture of a unified spiritual astronomical worldview, one that our current science is only beginning to grasp. Well, there's a lot of supporting evidence. The Solstice Project, led by Anna Sofer, which began in 1977, is still going on. National Park Service data from Chaco and architectural solar alignments. There are peer-reviewed studies in American Antiquity and Journal of Archaeoastronomy. Then there's Hopi and Zuni community oral histories. Research from Los Alamos National Laboratory using modern solar simulations. The determination's been made that Chaco Canyon wasn't just a settlement. It was a calendar, a compass, a sacred vessel of time carved into rock and shadow. These beams of light weren't accidents. They were coded messages written by ancient astronomers who understood the sky better than we thought possible, better than we do today. And they still shine year after year, exactly where they're meant to. Well, if you think archaeology is the end-all be-all, let's talk about the Saqqara bird. In 1898, inside a tomb in Saqqara, that's a necropolis of ancient Memphis, Egypt, archaeologists discovered a curious object, a 6-inch wooden carving resembling a bird, with distinctly unbird-like wings. They were flat, they were rigid, but the little carving is strangely aerodynamic. Now, at first glance, you might think it was a child's toy. There are no inscriptions, no ceremonial markings, just a simple bird figure carved from sycamore, with a vertical tail far more reminiscent of a modern aircraft rudder than anything biological. Antiquities Department categorized it as a model bird. Just like that, it was boxed up and stored away and ignored for the next 70 years. Unlike traditional Egyptian carvings, this object lacked feathers or talons. Its tail pointed upward like a plane's rudder, not outward like a bird's. Wings were perfectly flat and straight, not curved or angled. Didn't have any legs, perching apparatus, and the silhouette echoed early delta wing glider designs. Now, most scholars dismissed these designs as oddities. They chalked it up to stylized artistry and quirky carving style lost to time. But a handful of researchers saw something else entirely. In 1969, Dr. Khalil Messiah, our Egyptian physician and amateur archaeologist who visited the artifact, made a radical claim. He said this wasn't a bird, this was a glider. He commissioned scale replicas and ran basic aerodynamic tests, and the results stunned observers. The model could generate lift and glide for short distances. Its wing to weight ratio is comparable to early 20th century glider planes. Even more impressively, with minor adjustments like a small stabilizing tail that flew with remarkable balance and stability. He suggested the carving might represent ancient lost knowledge of flight, possibly a ceremonial object or prototype. Of course, mainstream Egyptologists labeled it pseudo-archaeology and dismissed it. But the flight test held up. Traditional scholars doubled down. They noted no Egyptian texts mentioned human flight. And no other gliders or aviation tools have been found from that era. The idea was too unconventional to even take seriously. So the Saqqara bird was returned to storage, off limits to the public, and actually erased from academic conversation. Still, the questions persisted. Why was this artifact shaped so differently? Why did it work so aerodynamically if it was just a toy? And why did it so closely resemble a functional prototype more than an artistic depiction? Well, decades later, NASA engineers and model aviation experts replicated Dr. Messiah's test, and their models flew too. The addition of a simple horizontal tailplane, stability improved even further. Some theorize the original artifact may have been part of a larger composite object. Skeptics argue it's simply an odd shape, a fluke of design, a toy without any deeper meaning. The proponents countered that ancient cultures often encoded knowledge in symbols and scale models, and similar aerodynamic curiosity appears in artifacts from other early civilizations. Well, the Saqqara bird's vertical tail fin doesn't match any known bird species, but it makes perfect sense in the logic of aeronautical engineering. Could an ancient Egyptian craftsman have stumbled upon principles of lift by watching birds or maybe throwing shaped sticks? Was it simply a misinterpreted figurine? Well, the Saqqara bird remains one of archaeology's most compelling anomalies. It forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. Were ancient people more advanced than we credit them? Are we too quick to dismiss objects that don't fit our models? And what other toys are actually messages from the past misunderstood and shelved? Today, the artifact is stored in the Cairo Museum, rarely displayed and largely forgotten. But in quiet circles, among model builders and experimental historians and the curious, it continues to fly. In tests and conversations, and even in the imagination of the builders. Well, if you want more information, go to Dr. Khalil Messiah's papers and interviews. You find in the Egyptian Civil Aviation Department, dated 1971. Replication studies by NASA engineers and model aviation experts. Smithsonian coverage on anomalous ancient technologies. Reports on early glider and aerodynamic experimentation in ancient cultures. And in the Cairo Museum's official catalog record from 1898. Well, without a lost relic, whether it was a lost relic of experimental flight or a curious wooden toy, the Saqqara bird still whispers across centuries. Its curve suggests knowledge we didn't think existed at the time. Its wings hint at something more. And its quiet story of silence reminds us even the smallest artifacts can carry the biggest questions. Did the ancient Egyptians have knowledge of flight? Well, on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow. And once again, we'll be talking about Ken Hudnall and whatever else he can come up with. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show saying have a truly great evening.